Today we're going to look at solving equations. So the first thing is to look at what is an equation. So an equation is two algebraic expressions combined with an equal sign. When you solve an equation, you are finding a solution. The solution is a number that makes both sides equal or balanced. Alright, so the addition property to solve an equation. So the addition property is the property that helps you combine your like terms on opposite sides of the equation. So, so this property helps you combine like terms on opposite sides. So when you are combining like terms on opposite sides of the equation, you're going to do the opposite property. So let's look at this first one. So this first one says x plus 5 is equal to 6. So if I wanted to solve for x, I know that it's going to be 1, right? So because 1 plus 5 gives me a 6. Well, how do I solve this? They're not always going to be this easy, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 5 and I want to combine it with the 6 over here. But to be able to combine it, I've got to go across that equal sign. So if I'm going to go across that equal sign, I'm going to do the opposite property of this addition sign. So I'm going to subtract it. So when it's subtracted, it's going to make that a 0. So what I'm going to be left with on that left side is just an x now. So 6 minus 5 is going to give me a 1. Remember, you always want to check your answer. So, of course, I already said 1 plus 5 is definitely a 6. Alright, so what about this one? This one's x minus 3 is equal to 12. So, take that equal sign and draw a little hash mark, or you could draw a line through it, because when you go over that line, you're going to do opposites. So, this is x minus 3 is going to give me a 12. So, something take away 3 is going to give you 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3 to both sides because those are like terms. So I'm going to be left with an x over here, and 12 plus 3 gives me a 15. Alright, so what about that? 3x is going to be equal to a 2x minus a 1. So 3x is equal to 2x minus a 1. So what am I going to combine here? Okay, so I'm going to combine my like terms that are my x's. So this is an imaginary plus sign in front right here. So it's an imaginary plus, so I'm going to subtract. I'm going to combine my like terms. So I'm going to have 3x minus a 2x is going to give me an x. I'm going to be left with a negative 1. Alright, so over here I'm going to, here's my equal sign, I want to combine 7x and 6x because those are like terms. So I'm going to do the opposite operation, so I'm going to subtract a 6x. 7x minus a 6x is an x. Is going to be equal to a 5. Okay. Alright, let's look at this one here. So, before I can go across that equal sign, I want to first combine like terms on the same side. Okay, so let's look at this left-hand side first. So are there any terms that I can combine together? So I can take 2x and I can add it to this x. Those are the same terms. 2x plus a 1x is a 3x. I'm just going to go ahead and bring down that minus 6. And then now I've got a simplified left-hand side and a simplified right-hand side. So now I want to combine opposite terms, or the same terms, but they're on opposite sides of the equation. So I need to combine this 2x and that 3x together. So I'm going to take that 2x and bring it over here to this 3x. So I'm going to subtract that. So I'm going to be left with 3x minus a 2x, which is just an x. Bring down the minus a 6. 2x minus a 2x is a 0, so it's going to go away. So I'm going to be left with that plus a 5. And remember, that's an imaginary 5. So plus a 5, you can also just say that's just a 5. Because when you write 5, it's understood to be a plus. So now I want to combine the 6 and that 5 together. So this is a minus 6 here, so I am going to add a 6 to both sides here. So I'm going to get an x is left over there, and 5 plus 6 gives me an 11. Good deal? Alright, so if you've got a multi-step like this, you definitely want to combine what's on your left-hand side and what's on your right-hand side. Alright, so now we've got the multiplication property. So multiplication property is after you use the addition property. So we don't start off with this one usually. 95% of the time you do not start off with the multiplication property. So after you've done okay, so if you are left with a number on the front of the x, all these that we had, we were not left with a number. But if you got through and you were left with a number on the outside of the x, you would use the multiplication property. Alright, so for this one, when you use the multiplication property, same thing, opposite operation, opposite operation. So let's look here. This is 3 times x is equal to a 9. So what number times 3 is going to give you a 9? And that answer is 3. But to find this one, remember, it's not always going to be that easy. What's the opposite operation to multiplication? Is division. So when I divide here, 3 divided by 3 is going to leave me with a 1. So earlier when you're using the addition property, you're subtracting or adding to give you a 0 on both sides of the equation, or on one side of the equation. For this one, you want a 1 in front of the x. And so that's why you're going to divide by 3 here, because there is a 3 on the front. And to get rid of that x, to get rid of that number, and be left with an x, you will divide by that 3. So you'll be left with the 1x is going to be equal to 9 divided by 3, which is going to be a 3. And then here, let's look at this one. So I've got x divided by 4 is going to give me a 2. So what am I going to do to both sides? I'm going to multiply both sides by 4. Opposite operation of division is multiplication. So what I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other side. So the 4, this is just like a 4 over a 1, that's going to go away, and I'm going to be left with a 1x here. And then I'm going to be left with 2 times 4, which is an 8. Right here we've got a negative x is equal to a 10. So this is a negative 1x is equal to a 10. So same thing, I've got to get a positive 1 there. So I am going to divide both sides by a negative 1. So negative divided by a negative is going to leave me a positive x. 10 divided by negative 1 is a negative 10. Okay. All right, look at this one. This one is identical to number 2, but it's just written in a different form. So this is a 1/2 here. 1/2 times x is equal to a 12. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, 2 over 1. What I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other side here. It's the same thing as saying I'm dividing both sides by 1/2. So I'm going to be left with x is going to be equal to 12 times 2, which is a 24. Here, I'm going to multiply both sides by 3 over a 2. So I'm going to multiply by 3 over a 2. So I'm going to have a negative 4 times a 3, which is a negative 12. And here, I'm going to be left with a 1x. Okay, so those are your basic properties. So I want you to go ahead and work on your homework for this, and then we'll put it all together tomorrow. Have a great day.